Ethan was an experienced hiker, the kind who prided himself on his ability to read a map, sense the weather, and never get lost. That's why he didn't think twice when he set out alone on the Ridgeway Trail, a well-marked path winding through the thick expanse of the Pine Hollow National Forest. It was supposed to be an easy day hike. 6 miles in, 6 miles out. Nothing complicated. He had hiked the trail before. It was familiar, predictable, safe, until it wasn't. It started small, barely noticeable. The first sign that something was wrong came when Ethan checked his watch. He'd been walking for an hour, but when he glanced at the mile marker on the side of the path, it read mile 2. That wasn't right. He was moving at a steady pace. By now, he should have been at least 4 miles in. Maybe he misread the marker. Maybe he had just overlooked one along the way. Simple mistake. He kept going, but as the hours stretched on, the feeling in his gut grew heavy. Something was off. The landscape, once so familiar, felt wrong. The trees looked the same, identical even, as if they had been copied and pasted in a repeating pattern. No variation. No fallen logs, no scattered rocks. Just the same crooked pine over and over again. And then he saw it. Another mile marker. The same one. Mile 2. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. His pulse pounded against his ears. He turned, looking back the way he came. Maybe he had just been looping around without realizing it. Maybe there was a side path he had missed. But when he retraced his steps for a few minutes and turned back forward, his stomach dropped. The trail was gone. There had been a clear dirt path beneath his feet a moment ago, but now, nothing. Just untouched forest floor, as if no one had ever walked there before. A deep unease spread through Ethan's body. He wasn't new to the woods. He knew how to stay calm, how to find his way back. But the more he moved, the more things started to change. The trees grew denser, twisting in strange directions, like skeletal fingers clawing toward the sky. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural silence. No birds, no insects, just his own breath, ragged and shallow. And then the whispers started, soft at first, like wind through the branches. But then, clearer, words he couldn't quite understand, spoken just behind him. He whipped around. Nothing. He kept walking, his heartbeat now a relentless drum against his ribs. But every few minutes, he would hear it again. Closer, a rustle in the underbrush, a shadow moving between the trees. And then he saw the mile marker again. Mile 2. Panic swelled in his chest. He had been walking in a straight line. He knew he had, but the sign never changed. The forest never changed. He was trapped. Ethan tried something different. He pulled out his compass. North. He would just head north. It didn't matter where the trail went. If he walked in one direction long enough, he would hit a road or a clearing. But the moment he took a step forward, the compass needle spun wildly, pointing in every direction at once before stopping. North was now behind him. His breath hitched. His skin turned ice cold. That wasn't possible. Something was wrong with this place. Fighting against every instinct telling him to run, Ethan forced himself to keep moving. He walked for what felt like hours. The sun, once high in the sky, never seemed to move. Time felt stretched, distorted. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he had lost his appetite completely. His legs burned, but stopping felt like an even worse option. Then up ahead, a figure, standing in the middle of the trail. He nearly sobbed with relief. Another hiker, someone else who was lost. Maybe they could figure a way out together. But as he got closer, the relief curdled into fear. The figure was standing too still, their body slightly swaying, though there was no wind. Their face was turned away, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Ethan stopped. He opened his mouth to call out, but no sound came. The moment he tried to speak, a sharp, ringing noise filled his ears. And then, the figure turned. It was him, a perfect copy. His own face staring back at him, empty-eyed, slack-jawed. His own backpack, his own clothes. And then it smiled. A slow, unnatural curl of lips. Not friendly, not human. Ethan ran, branches toward his arms. His lungs screamed for air. He ran and ran and ran, not daring to look back. The whispers chased him, growing louder, the air vibrating with something wrong. And then, he stumbled forward, crashed into something hard. The parking lot. His car, right where he had left it. But when he turned to look back at the woods, the trail was gone. Just an endless stretch of trees, untouched, as if no one had ever walked there at all. Some places are not meant to be found. Some paths were never meant to be walked. And sometimes, when you step too far into the unknown, something else steps out. Ethan never went hiking again. And if you ever find yourself on a trail that seems to twist and turn in ways it shouldn't, ask yourself, are you the one moving through the forest? Or is the forest moving around you? The story comes from an experienced solo backpacker named Daniel. He had hiked dozens of trails across the country and never once felt unsafe. But this time, something felt different. He was deep in the mountains of Oregon, following a narrow, winding trail that cut through dense forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the path. As the quiet of the woods settled in, Daniel decided to fill the silence the way he often did, by singing. It was a habit he'd picked up over the years, a way to keep his mind occupied while hiking alone. His voice carried through the trees, bouncing off the cliffs and returning to him a second later. The echo was familiar, predictable, something he had always found comfort in. But then, something changed. As he finished a verse and let the echo return, he noticed something off. It was subtle at first. The timing was slightly wrong, as if the reflection of his voice was coming from somewhere too close, somewhere unnatural. He brushed it off as a trick of the landscape, until it happened again. This time, the echo didn't just repeat, it altered. Daniel had sung the words, "I walk this road alone." But what came back wasn't the exact phrase he had sung. The voice that answered him whispered, "I walk with you." Daniel froze. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound of his own breath suddenly deafening in the eerie silence. He told himself it was impossible, just his mind playing tricks. Maybe he had misheard. Maybe the wind had distorted the sound. But as he stood there, the forest around him grew unnervingly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the slow, creeping sensation that he wasn't alone. Determined to prove himself wrong, Daniel sang another line, something random, something different. "The sky is turning red." A moment later, the echo returned. "It will soon be dark." A cold shiver ran down his spine. The voice was his own, but it wasn't. There was something hollow about it, something empty, like a mouth moving without a soul behind it. Panic began to settle in. He quickened his pace, moving faster along the trail. But no matter how far he walked, the echo stayed with him. He tested it again, whispering, "Who are you?" into the void. The reply came softer, but unmistakable. "I am you." Daniel stopped singing after that. He tried to ignore the unease clawing at the back of his mind. He told himself it had to be the wind, the acoustics of the valley, something rational. But as night fell, things got worse. While setting up camp, he heard movement in the distance, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching leaves. He turned his flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The light caught only the dense trees, the shifting shadows. Then he heard it again, a whisper, so quiet he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. "I'll walk with you." That was enough. Daniel made the decision to leave. He grabbed his gear and started down the trail, not caring that it was dark, not caring that he was breaking every rule of safe hiking. He just needed to get out. But the forest had other plans. As he moved, the whispering continued, growing closer, growing more insistent. The echoes weren't waiting for him to speak anymore. They were talking on their own. "I see you. I follow." The voice was his, but something was wrong. The cadence, the tone, it was twisting, warping, becoming something inhuman. And then, just ahead, his flashlight beam caught something that made his blood turn to ice. A figure stood on the trail. It was dark, featureless, but its posture, it was identical to his. And then it did something that made every nerve in his body scream. It opened its mouth, and his own voice came out. "I am you." That was the last thing Daniel remembered before running, sprinting through the darkness, not stopping, not looking back. By the time he reached his car, he was breathless, shaking, and drenched in sweat. He never returned to that trail again. So, what exactly did Daniel encounter? Was it a trick of the mind? an elaborate auditory illusion caused by the mountains? Or was it something more? Something ancient, something that lingers in the deep, quiet places of the world, waiting for someone to acknowledge it? Folklore is filled with tales of creatures that mimic human voices, skinwalkers, wendigos, doppelgangers. Some believe these entities use voices to lure people away from safety, to make them question what is real and what isn't. Others say that when the forest echoes back something different, it means something else is listening, something that wants to be you. Perhaps the scariest thought of all is this: if you were alone in the woods and your echo did change, would you dare to keep listening? Until next time, keep your eyes open and don't listen too closely. It started as a simple weekend getaway, just 4 friends looking for a break from city life. Jake, Marissa, Lucas, and Danielle had planned the trip for months. A remote, off-the-grid hiking trail nestled deep in the Appalachian wilderness. No cell service, no roads for miles, just them and the vast, untouched forest. They reached the trailhead by noon, the dense canopy overhead filtering the sunlight into eerie patches along the ground. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and pine. Everything seemed perfect until the whispers began. At first, they chalked it up to the wind, the way it moved through the trees, shifting and sighing. But as they trekked deeper, the whispers became distinct. Not just noise, words, their names. At first, it was barely audible, a breathy murmur just on the edge of perception. Marissa, she stopped, turning to the others. Did you guys hear that? Jake raised an eyebrow. Hear what? She hesitated. Maybe she was imagining things. Nothing. Never mind. But she wasn't the only one who heard it. A few minutes later, Lucas stopped in his tracks. His face paled. Okay. No, seriously. I just heard someone say my name. The group exchanged uneasy glances. They were miles from the nearest town. No one else was out here. Then Danielle gasped. It just said my name too. A cold silence settled over them. The rational part of their brains wanted to dismiss it. Maybe it was a trick of the wind or their minds playing games. But deep down, something told them this was wrong. This wasn't natural. They picked up the pace, hoping to reach the designated campsite before sundown. But the whispers didn't stop. They got closer, more distinct. We need to get out of here. Now. But leaving wasn't an option. The nearest road was a day's hike away, and the forest was thick. Traveling at night could be even more dangerous. They decided to push forward, forcing laughter, trying to shake the tension. That night, as they sat around the fire, the mood was somber. The trees stood tall around them like silent sentinels. The wind had died down, but the whispers hadn't. They came from just beyond the fire's glow. Closer now, and they no longer just whispered names. They were repeating things. Words a group had said earlier that day. Snippets of conversation echoed back in the same voices, but distorted, as if the forest itself had been listening. Then came the laughter. Light, airy giggles. A child's voice. Playful but wrong. Who's there? The laughter stopped instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, from the darkness, the voice returned. And this time, it didn't whisper. It spoke in perfect clarity. We see you. The group bolted to their feet. Flashlights beamed into the darkness, but nothing was there. No movement, no figures, just trees. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable. We need to leave. They packed up in record time, abandoning the planned route. The only goal was getting out of the forest as quickly as possible. But no matter how far they walked, the whispers followed, repeating their names, echoing their own voices back at them, mocking. Then, the whispers turned into something worse. They started hearing footsteps, not theirs, not animals, something heavier, something that moved when they moved, stopped when they stopped. By dawn, they emerged from the tree line, exhausted and terrified. The whispers had finally stopped, but something had changed. They had made it out, but the forest had left its mark. Marissa was the first to notice. As they reached their car, she hesitated. Guys, where's Jake? They spun around. He had been right behind them moments ago, but now, gone. No sound, no trace, no footprints leading away, just missing. And then, As they stood there in stunned silence, the wind rustled through the trees. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, they heard his voice. Soft, whispering, calling their names. Some legends say the forest has a way of taking what it wants. That it chooses people, drawing them in, learning their names, and never letting them go. Was it an echo of something unnatural? A spirit that mimicked voices to lure them deeper? Or something even older? Something that doesn't just hear us, but knows us? One thing is certain. Some places were never meant to be disturbed. And some whispers should never be answered. If you ever find yourself hiking deep in the woods, and you hear your name spoken in the wind, don't turn around. Keep walking, and pray that whatever's whispering doesn't follow. The wilderness is supposed to be peaceful. Solitude, fresh air, the escape from civilization. It's why David, an experienced backpacker, ventured out alone into the mountains. It was just another hiking trip. One night in the woods before heading back to his car in the morning. But as the sun dipped below the trees and the sky bled into twilight, something changed. It started with a feeling, a slow, creeping unease that slithered up his spine. He told himself it was just paranoia. That's what happens when you're alone in the dark, right? Then came the sound. Crunch. A footstep. Crunch. A second one. David froze, staring into the black abyss between the trees. He wasn't alone. At first, it was just a shape, a shadow moving between the trunks, half hidden by the gloom. But when it stepped closer, the dying light of the campfire revealed something wrong. A man, tall, lanky, dressed in a pale gray hoodie and jeans that looked too clean for the wilderness. His head was tilted slightly, watching, studying. Then he smiled. Not just a normal smile. Not a polite, passing grin. This was unnatural. Too wide. Lips stretching further than they should, exposing too many teeth. Teeth that were too straight, too perfect. David felt his stomach twist. "Hey, you lost," he called out, trying to sound calm. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, smiling. Seconds stretched into eternity. David's pulse pounded. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned, walked away, disappeared into the trees. David let out a breath. Maybe it was just some weird hiker. Maybe he was imagining things. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. That night, David barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that smile. By sunrise, he had made a decision. He was leaving. Fast. Packing up his tent, he slung his backpack over his shoulders and set off down the trail, moving quickly. The sooner he reached his car, the better. The morning air was crisp. Birds chirped overhead. For a while, everything felt normal again, until he rounded a bend and saw him, standing in the middle of the trail, waiting, the exact same smile carved into his face. David's breath hitched. He hadn't heard footsteps. He hadn't heard anything. It was like the man had always been there, just waiting for him to arrive. David took a step back. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just smiled. With his heart pounding, David turned and took an alternate path, hiking faster now. He wasn't going to confront this man. He just needed to get back to his car. But then, he saw him again, standing further down the new path, still smiling. This time, David ran. David sprinted through the trees, heart hammering, lungs burning. He didn't know how the man kept getting ahead of him, but it didn't matter. He just needed to escape. Branches whipped past his face. The trail blurred beneath his feet. Then, he burst into a clearing. His car was there, just a few hundred feet away, parked at the edge of the trailhead. Relief flooded his chest. He was going to make it, but as he reached for his keys, a shadow shifted near the trees. He was there, standing just a few feet away. That same smile, unchanging, unwavering, unnatural. David didn't hesitate. He dove in his car, locking the doors, gasping for breath. Through the windshield, the man just stood there, head slightly tilted, still smiling. David fumbled with the keys. His hands were shaking. The engine roared to life, and as the car lurched forward, the man tilted his head even further, as if listening, as if understanding something. And then he waved. Not a normal wave. A slow, deliberate motion. fingers bending like they weren't used to the movement. David didn't wait to see what happened next. Tires screeched. He sped down the dirt road, kicking up dust. And when he finally looked in the rearview mirror, the man was gone. David never went hiking alone again. For weeks, he dreamed of that smile. He avoided the woods. He told himself it was just a crazy person, some deranged hiker playing a sick joke. But deep down, he knew better. How had the man moved so fast? How did he always know where David would be? And most disturbing of all, what if it wasn't a man at all? This story leaves us with unsettling questions. Who, or what, was the smiling man? Was he a ghost? A doppelganger? Or something even worse? Something not human wearing a human face? The uncanny valley theory suggests we feel fear when something almost looks human but isn't quite right. The smiling man fits this perfectly. His expression, his movements, they were just off enough to trigger deep, primal fear. There are also stories of supernatural entities that mimic human behavior, but incorrectly, as if something is trying to blend in and failing. Maybe David encountered something ancient, something practicing, and maybe it's still out there, still smiling, waiting for someone new to follow. Ethan had always found solace in hiking. The rhythm of his boots against the dirt, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. It was his escape from the pressures of everyday life. This time, he had chosen an unfamiliar trail, one that wound deep into the Appalachian wilderness. It wasn't on any official map, but locals spoke of it in hushed tones. The old fog trail, they'd called it. Weather rolls in thick there, easy to get lost. But Ethan wasn't superstitious. He had his GPS, a compass, and a keen sense of direction. He'd be fine, or so he thought. As he climbed higher into the mountains, a dense fog rolled in. It wasn't the kind that gently draped itself over the trees. It was suffocating, impenetrable, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. The sun vanished behind the thick mist, and suddenly, Ethan was walking in a world that felt wrong. The sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, the distant trickle of a stream, were gone. There was only silence, the kind that made his skin crawl. Then he saw it, a small clearing just ahead, barely visible through the haze. And in the center, an abandoned campfire. It had been hastily built, nothing more than a ring of stones with a pile of burned wood. But the embers, they were still warm. Someone had been here recently. Ethan felt an uneasy chill creep up his spine. He called out, his voice sounding strangely muted in the fog. "Hello? Anyone out here?" No answer. Then, he noticed something else. Footprints. Dozens of them, circling the fire pit. But when he crouched down for a closer look, his breath hitched in his throat. They were his. The same tread pattern from his hiking boots. The same stride length. But he hadn't been here before. Had he? He glanced behind him, expecting to see the trail he'd just walked. But it was gone. The fog had swallowed a hole. His stomach twisted with unease. He had only been hiking for a couple of hours, yet he suddenly couldn't remember which direction he'd come from. Ethan shook his head, trying to fight the disorientation creeping into his mind. It's just the fog playing tricks on me. I need to keep moving. He picked a direction and walked. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20, and then he saw it again. The same clearing, the same campfire, the same warm embers. A sense of dread settled deep in his bones. He had walked in a straight line. He was sure of it. But somehow, he was back in the exact same spot. His footprints, fresh ones, circled the fire pit again. Panic began to creep in. He pulled out his compass, but the needle spun wildly, as if confused. His GPS screen flickered before turning black. Then, the whispering started. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. Words he couldn't quite make out, moving through the fog like shifting shadows. He turned, his pulse pounding. "Who's there?" No answer. The whispering grew louder, curling around him like invisible tendrils. "Join us, stay." The voices bled together, overlapping, twisting into a chorus of something ancient and hungry. Ethan's breath came in short gasps. He bolted, running blindly through the mist, desperate to break free from whatever was toying with him. His legs burned, his heart hammered against his ribs. And then he saw something up ahead, a shadowy figure standing motionless in the fog. He skidded to a stop, his breath hitching. The figure was eerily still, its shape indistinct, as if the fog itself had molded into something human. Then it took a step forward. Ethan stumbled back. He tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, like they weren't entirely his. The figure stepped closer and closer, and then it spoke. "Don't you remember?" The voice was his own. A horrible realization hit him like ice water. The footprints, the campfire, the whispers. He had been here before. Again, and again, and again. The fog had trapped him in a loop without time. The figure raised a hand, mirroring Ethan's own trembling fingers. A perfect reflection. A past version of himself? A future one? Ethan opened his mouth to scream, but the fog swallowed the sound. And as the shadow stepped fully into view, he saw its face. His face, but older, haggard, hollow-eyed, and it was smiling. The mist thickened, the world blurred, and then silence. Was Ethan caught in a time loop? Was he seeing the ghost of himself, doomed to wander the same path for eternity? The idea of time slipping in isolated locations is a chilling and recurring theme in horror. The unknown elements of the fog, distorting reality, consuming memories, are reminiscent of folklore surrounding lost hikers and vanishing trails. Many cultures have legends of places that don't obey the rules of time. The Aokigahara forest in Japan is said to confuse hikers, causing them to walk in endless circles. The Bermuda Triangle has tales of lost ships appearing decades later, untouched by time. Could Ethan have stumbled into something similar? Or is something else watching him, keeping him there? Perhaps the fog wasn't just weather. Perhaps it was alive. What do you think? Could this story be a warning about places humans aren't meant to explore? Or is it simply a trick of the mind? Fear feeding itself in the vast, uncharted wilderness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And remember, if you ever find yourself hiking alone and the fog rolls in thick, be careful where you step, because you might not be the first version of yourself to walk that path, or the last. Imagine you're deep in the wilderness, no one for miles. The air is still, the trees motionless, and the only sound is the rhythmic crunch of your boots against the dirt. You stop to take a breath, to listen to the eerie silence of the forest. And then, you hear it, a second pair of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, close. You spin around, but there's nothing there, just the empty trail behind you. You tell yourself it's your mind playing tricks, that the isolation is getting to you. But the moment you move again, so do they. Tonight, we explore a chilling tale of one hiker's terrifying encounter with something that was never meant to be seen. This story was shared online by someone who insists it happened to them in 2018. Let's call him Mark. Mark was an experienced hiker, someone who had spent years backpacking solo through remote regions of the United States. He prided himself on his knowledge of survival, always prepared, always cautious. But none of that could have prepared him for what he experienced on that cold autumn night. He had been hiking alone through a dense, misty forest in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place where trees loom like towering shadows, their gnarled branches forming a skeletal canopy above. There was something unsettling about this particular trail, something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the silence. The forest should have been alive with the sounds of nature, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the occasional snap of a twig beneath a small animal's foot. But there was nothing, just his own breathing and the steady, rhythmic crunch of his boots on the damp earth. And then he stopped, and he heard it, a second pair of footsteps. At first, he thought it was an echo, some trick of the terrain, the way sound bounces off trees in unpredictable ways. But the more he listened, the more certain he became this wasn't an echo. These footsteps had weight, purpose. They weren't perfectly synchronized with his own. They came half a second after, as if something or someone was following just behind him. Mark turned quickly, scanning the path. His heart pounded in his chest, but all he saw was the empty trail stretching back into the fog. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. No one was there, but that didn't make sense. The sound had been right there, close enough that he should have seen whatever caused it. Still, he shook it off. The mind plays tricks in isolation, he told himself. He adjusted his pack, took a deep breath, and pressed on. But now something had changed. Now, he could feel it. Hikers often talk about something called the feeling of being watched. It's a primal instinct, a leftover survival mechanism from when humans weren't at the top of the food chain. Mark had felt it before, in passing moments, when spotting a deer through the trees or catching a glimpse of an owl staring silently from branch. But this was different. This felt personal, like something was right behind him, so close it could reach out and touch him. The footsteps continued, soft, deliberate, never too far behind. And the moment he stopped, so did they. It happened over and over again. He would walk, hear them, stop, turn, and see nothing. Walk, hear them, stop, silence. A terrible thought crept into his mind. What if it knows? What if whatever is following me knows exactly what it's doing? By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and blood-red streaks, Mark knew he was in trouble. There was no turning back. The nearest town was nearly 10 miles behind him. The only option was to make camp and pray that morning would come quickly. He set up his tent in a small clearing, surrounded by towering fir trees. He built a fire, trying to push away the crushing darkness. For a while, it seemed to work. The warmth, the crackling flames, the light, it all felt safe. But then, as he sat in his sleeping bag, listening to the distant wind, he heard again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing, just outside his tent. Slow, measured, almost curious. Then, something dragged its fingers across the fabric of the tent. A long, deliberate stroke from one side to the other. Mark held his breath, gripping the knife he kept beside him. For what felt like hours, he stayed still, listening. And then, nothing. The presence was gone. But Mark knew, in the deepest part of his gut, that it wasn't over. At first light, Mark packed his things in a frenzy. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just needed to get out. And as he marched down the trail, every step frantic and desperate, he listened. But there were no footsteps this time. No breathing. No signs of whatever had tormented him the night before. It wasn't until he reached the ranger station, miles later, when he was finally safe, that he dared to check his phone. He had taken photos along the hike, documenting the trail, the strange fog, the eerie trees. But one picture stood out, one he didn't remember taking. A photo of the trail, and in the mist, just barely visible in the distance. A shadow, tall, thin, standing just behind him, watching. So what did Mark experience? Some say it was pareidolia, the brain seeing patterns where there are none. Others argue that solitude in the wilderness can play tricks on the mind. But some believe there are places in this world where something ancient lingers, something that watches, that follows, that waits. Whatever Mark encountered that night, it never revealed itself completely. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Because if it's still out there, it might not want to be seen. But that doesn't mean it's not watching. Mark had always been an experienced hiker. He'd traversed dozens of trails, camped in remote areas, and even solo-trekked through national forests. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened one cold autumn evening. He had been hiking alone for 3 days in a vast, untouched expanse of wilderness. The trail was rugged but well-mapped. Or so he thought. As dusk approached on the 3rd day, he realized something was wrong. The trail markers had disappeared. The landscape no longer matched his map. It was as if the forest had shifted around him while he wasn't looking. His GPS? Useless. No signal. His compass? Spinning erratically, as if confused. The sun had dipped too low now, and the cold night air was setting in fast. He needed shelter, and then he saw it. A cabin, nestled between 2 massive trees. Its wooden frame was old yet well-maintained. Warm, golden light glowed from the windows, illuminating the surrounding darkness. The strangest part? He was miles away from any marked settlements. According to his map, there was nothing here. But there it was. Approaching cautiously, Mark knocked on the wooden door. No response. He He called out, a greeting, a plea for help, but only the rustling leaves answered him. Then, against all logic, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the cabin was warm. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. The furniture looked aged but untouched, like it had been waiting for someone. On a small wooden table, a single oil lamp burned, illuminating an open book. His book. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was his journal, the same leather-bound notebook he carried in his backpack. But it was still zipped inside his pack, untouched. With trembling hands, he picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakably his. But the words? They described events he had no memory of. The cabin is waiting for me. I have seen it before. I'm not alone. I should not have come inside. He flipped through the pages in growing horror. The entries stretched back weeks, months. They spoke of him staying here, night after night, unable to leave. Trapped. And then, the final entry. I hear footsteps outside. He's coming. A floorboard creaked behind him. Mark spun around, his heart hammering. But the cabin was empty. Or so it seemed. The warm glow of the cabin suddenly felt suffocating. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen. He backed toward the door, only to see something that made his stomach drop. The door was closed, and on the inside of the wood, etched deep into its surface, were words, scratched by nails or something sharper. Let me out. So what exactly did Mark experience? Let's break it down. One theory suggests that Mark stumbled upon a time loop, a pocket of reality trapped in an endless cycle. The journal entries could be remnants of a past or future version of himself, forever caught in the cabin's grip. Another possibility? The cabin was never truly there. Many who venture too deep into the wilderness speak of the call of the forest, a supernatural force that preys on lost souls, luring them with false hopes of safety. Could the cabin have been an illusion, a trap woven from his own fears and memories? And then there's the most unsettling theory of all. What if the cabin wasn't abandoned at all? What if something lived there, something that needed Mark to replace the last unfortunate soul who entered? Mark did the only thing he could. He ran. He tore through the forest, ignoring the branches clawing at his skin, ignoring the whispers that seemed to follow him. When he finally collapsed onto a familiar trail, the cabin was gone. No sign of it. No footprints leading to it. But there was one last, inexplicable thing. His journal, his real journal, still in his backpack, had a new entry. One he never wrote. You will find it again. So tell me, what would you do if you stumbled upon a cabin that shouldn't exist? Would you step inside? Or would you listen to that quiet voice in the back of your mind telling you to run before it's too late? If you enjoyed this unsettling tale, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more terrifying stories that make you question reality itself. Until next time, keep an eye on the shadows. James had always loved hiking alone. He found peace in the stillness of the forest, in the way the world felt untouched the deeper he walked. That summer, he set out on a trail he had never taken before, one that wasn't marked on any official maps. It was old, overgrown, the kind of place that felt forgotten, just the way he liked it. But as the sun began to set, the air around him grew heavier. The wind died. The birds stopped singing. That's when he heard it, a sound beneath his feet, muffled, distant, a cry. James froze. He told himself it was the wind, a trick of the mind. But then it came again, a voice weak, desperate, trapped beneath the earth. He scanned the ground, searching for the source, until his eyes landed on a massive, weathered boulder. It sat alone in a clearing, unnatural in its isolation. The sound was coming from beneath it. Help me. The words were faint, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. James dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the stone. Someone was down there, alive. His heart pounded as he tried to push the boulder, but it was massive, hundreds of pounds, immovable. He reached for his phone, but there was no signal. Miles from the nearest town, deep in the woods, he was alone. Still, he couldn't just leave. He grabbed a fallen branch, using it as leverage, wedging it beneath the rock. He pushed with everything he had. The boulder shifted just an inch, and that's when he heard it. Stop! The voice beneath the rock changed. No longer weak, no longer desperate. It was clear, calm, too calm. James' breath hitched. He hesitated, his hands still gripping the branch. He had spent the last 5 minutes trying to free whoever or whatever was underneath. But now it was telling him not to. The silence stretched. Then, in a voice eerily identical to his own, it whispered again. Leave. James stumbled back, his mind racing. It was impossible. Maybe the stress was making him hear things. Maybe the boulder shifted, not from his efforts. It moved on its own. James didn't wait to see what was beneath it. He ran. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. Branches slashing at his skin, roots threatening to trip him. The air behind him felt wrong. Thick, heavy, charged with something unnatural. The forest itself seemed to shift, warping as he fled. When he finally burst out onto a familiar trail, gasping for breath, he dared one last look over his shoulder. The forest was still. The boulder was back in place, as if it had never moved, as if it had never wanted to. What did James hear beneath that boulder? Was it truly a person trapped underground, or something far worse? Some believe the forest holds ancient spirits, entities that lure the curious with familiar voices, only to claim them for themselves. Others think it could be a geological phenomenon, strange echoes from underground caverns, making it sound like voices are trapped beneath the earth. But there's another possibility, one that is far more disturbing. What if whatever was beneath the rock wasn't trying to get out? What if it was trying to pull him in? James never returned to that trail. He never spoke about it again, at least not publicly. But sometimes in the dead of night, he dreams of that voice. And in those dreams, it no longer sounds like his own. Maybe the forest keeps its secrets for a reason. Maybe some things are meant to stay buried. And maybe the next time you hear something whispering beneath your feet, you shouldn't try to help. You should run. It started like any other solo hiking trip. James had planned a 3-day trek through a remote section of forest deep in the Appalachian wilderness. He wasn't new to hiking. He knew how to read a map, navigate by landmarks, and he carried enough supplies to last him longer than he needed. But all the experience in the world couldn't prepare him for what he was about to step into. On the second day of his journey, James followed what should have been a straightforward trail, a simple loop that would take him back toward his campsite before nightfall. The problem? After hours of walking, he kept ending up at the exact same spot, a clearing with a massive, gnarled oak tree standing at its center. At first, he thought he must have miscalculated. Perhaps he had taken a wrong turn, but after carefully retracing his steps, he found himself there again, and something was different. The sun, which had been high in the sky when he first noticed the loop, had dropped lower than it should have in that short amount of time. The air was growing colder, the light taking on an eerie, amber hue. Even the trees, they seemed taller, their bark darker, as if they had aged decades in mere minutes. James checked his compass. The needle spun wildly before settling in the wrong direction. His GPS? No signal. That was when he heard it. A voice, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. It wasn't calling for help. It was mimicking him. A second ago, James had whispered to himself, "This doesn't make sense." And yet, somewhere in the trees, he heard his own voice repeat the words. Identical, but hollow. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. Something was listening. Determined to break free, James pushed forward in a straight line, ignoring the so-called path. He hacked through underbrush, climbed over fallen logs, and moved in what should have been an entirely new direction. Yet somehow, impossibly, after another half hour of walking, he stumbled into that same clearing with the ancient oak tree. Only now, the light was almost gone. The sun, or whatever it was in the sky, had nearly set. And that's when he noticed the carvings. Names. Dozens of them, etched deep into the oak's bark. Some fresh, others so old they were barely legible. At the very bottom, scratched in crude, desperate strokes, was a message. Do not sleep. Do not let it get dark. James' breath caught in his throat, because just beneath the warning was his own name. It hadn't been there before. His heart pounded. He couldn't stay here. He had to move. He had to find a way out. But as he turned, the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the horizon. And that's when he heard the footsteps. Not animal, not human, something else. Moving fast, moving toward him. And then the forest went completely silent. No wind, no insects, no sounds at all, except for the thing in the darkness. James ran. He didn't know where he was going anymore, only that he had to escape. He could feel it behind him, hear it shifting through the trees. But every time he turned to look, he saw nothing. Nothing except the darkness and the faint outline of something standing impossibly still. James had no choice. He dove into a crevice between two rocks, forcing himself into a space so tight nothing could follow. He stayed there, barely breathing, as the hours passed. The thing outside never left. But something worse happened. When the first light of dawn finally touched the trees, James crawled out, expecting relief. But what he saw made his stomach drop. The trees, asterisk, they were even older, asterisk. The sky was a shade darker. And when he pulled out his phone, the date, it was wrong. It was yesterday. Again, James was still trapped. The cycle had restarted, and he knew now he might never leave. Some say there are places where time folds in on itself. Places where the past, present, and future blur into one. Perhaps James stumbled into a loop, one that feeds on those who enter. But the real question is, who or what is resetting time? Did James unknowingly take someone else's place? Was the voice he heard earlier his own future self trying to warn him? Or worse, is he now part of the cycle, calling out to the next lost hiker, hoping they'll break the loop? One thing is certain, if you ever find yourself walking the same path over and over again, don't wait for the sun to set. It started as a simple weekend trip. 4 friends, Jason, Emily, Mark, and Sarah, set off for a remote camping adventure deep in the Appalachian wilderness. They were experienced hikers, well prepared with gear, food, and maps. The plan was to disconnect from the modern world, enjoy the silence of nature, and embrace the primal beauty of the untouched forest. The first day went smoothly. They set up camp near a quiet stream, cooked over a fire, and swapped ghost stories under the stars. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, something changed. The forest grew unnaturally still. The usual nighttime chorus of insects and owls fell silent, replaced by a strange, heavy hush, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Then the eyes appeared. It was Sarah who saw them first. She was tending the fire when she noticed small pinpricks of light reflecting from the treetops. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the firelight, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized the lights were eyes. Dozens of them, high up in the canopy, peering down. She nudged Jason and pointed. "Do you see that?" Jason squinted. "Probably owls," he said. But even as he spoke, something about them fell off. They didn't flicker or shift. They didn't belong to a single creature moving from branch to branch. No, they were everywhere, fixed in place, unmoving, watching. Then, as if responding to their recognition, the eyes multiplied. Mark grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the branches. But there was nothing there. The moment the light touched them, the eyes vanished, swallowed by the shadows. The second the beam moved away, they reappeared. Emily shuddered. This doesn't feel right. Despite their unease, the group tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion. Maybe their tired minds were playing tricks on them. But deep down, they knew something was wrong. As the night deepened, so did the feeling of unease. The glowing eyes never blinked, never moved, but now there was something new. A sound, a whispering. It was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the rustling leaves. But soon it grew clearer. Soft, fragmented voices drifted through the air, speaking in a language none of them recognized. Not human, not animal, something else entirely. It wasn't wind. It wasn't insects. It was growing louder. Panic set in. Mark suggested they douse the fire, make themselves less visible. But Emily refused. If they're watching us, I'd rather see them than be in total darkness. Then, a chilling realization hit them all at once. The whispering wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from above, from the trees. Suddenly, the glowing orbs did something they hadn't done all night. They shifted, not like an animal moving its head, more like a synchronized mass, tilting slightly, as if acknowledging their fear. The whispers turned to laughter, not the comforting sound of human amusement, but something distorted, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping and unnatural. Jason stood abruptly. "We need to leave. Now." But the moment he moved, the laughter stopped. A deafening silence fell over the campsite. The eyes disappeared. For a moment, there was hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been watching them had lost interest. Then, something heavy landed on the ground behind them. They didn't look back. They ran. Grabbing only their flashlights and phones, they bolted into the darkness, abandoning their tents and supplies. The forest around them seemed alive. Branches snagged at their clothes, roots threatened to trip them, as if the very ground wanted to keep them there. They ran for what felt like hours, guided only by instinct and sheer terror. Finally, they burst onto a dirt road, breathless and trembling. A passing truck stopped for them, and without hesitation, they climbed in. The driver, an old man, took one look at them and nodded. "You saw them, didn't you?" The friends exchanged uneasy glances. "Saw what?" Mark finally asked. The man didn't answer right away. He just exhaled deeply and muttered, "You're lucky you left when you did." This story raises chilling questions. What were the glowing eyes in the trees? Some believe they were spirits of the forest, ancient, malevolent entities that exist beyond human understanding. Others suggest they were fae-like beings, watching trespassers with eerie amusement. The synchronized movement, the whispered voices, the laughter, all point to something unnatural, something that thrives in the dark places we fear to tread. But the most terrifying part? The idea that these things, whatever they were, weren't just watching. They were waiting. This story is a grim reminder of the unknown horrors lurking in the wilderness. We go into the woods expecting solitude. But what if we're never truly alone? What if, as we hike, camp, and explore, unseen things are watching, silently observing, waiting for the right moment to let us know they see us? The next time you find yourself deep in the forest, under the cover of night, take a moment to look up. You might just see them too. Stay safe out there, and don't forget to check the trees. A seasoned hiker, Daniel, had always sought out the deepest, most secluded trails. He loved the solitude, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the way nature embraced him in its wild, untamed beauty. But on one particular hike, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, he found a place that felt wrong. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth clinging to him. He had been hiking for hours when he noticed something odd. He couldn't hear his own footsteps. Stopping in his tracks, he listened. No birds, no wind, no distant rustling of animals moving through the underbrush. Just absolute, unnatural silence. At first, he chalked it up to fatigue. Maybe he had wandered too deep, too far from the usual wildlife paths. But as he took another step, a dreadful realization settled in his gut. He couldn't even hear his own breathing. The silence wasn't normal. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the very air around him refused to carry sound. That's when he saw it. A shadow moved between the trees, too fast to be an animal, too fluid to be a person. He barely had time to process it before another darted just at the edge of his vision. His skin crawled. Something was out there, lurking just beyond the tree line. Daniel took a cautious step backward. As he did, the silence deepened, pressing in on him, a tangible force wrapping around his body like a vice. His heartbeat pounded in his chest, but the sound never reached his ears. Panic clawed at his throat. He turned back the way he came, moving fast now. But the trail, it wasn't the same. The trees were different, taller, older, gnarled, and twisted in ways that made no sense. It was as if the forest had shifted around him when he wasn't looking, closing in, trapping him inside something ancient and hungry. Then, a whisper. Just one. Not a voice, not quite. More like the rustling of dry leaves against bone. A presence behind him, closer than before. The kind of close that makes your instincts scream, telling you not to turn around. Telling you that whatever is there isn't meant to be seen. Daniel ran. Branches clawed at him, the silence swallowing the sound of his ragged breath, the pounding of his boots on the forest floor. The whispering followed, weaving through the trees, shifting, multiplying. He wasn't running from one thing anymore. He was running from many. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Sound returned all at once. The chirping of birds, the rustle of the wind, the distant rush of stream. The forest was normal again. But Daniel knew he had not imagined it. Something had been there, watching, hunting, and it had let him go. Daniel's story is eerily similar to many other hikers who have encountered pockets of unnatural silence in the wilderness. What could cause this phenomenon? 1. The missing 411 connection. David Paulide's Missing 411 Cases document bizarre disappearances in national parks. People who vanish without a trace, only to turn up miles away, disoriented, with no memory of what happened. Could these silent zones be connected to these disappearances? Perhaps they are doorways, leading somewhere we were never meant to go. 2. Infrasound and psychological effects. Some theorists suggest infrasound, low-frequency sound waves undetectable to human ears, could explain the eerie silence. These waves can induce anxiety, nausea, and even hallucinations, making hikers feel as if they're being watched. But if it's just a trick of the mind, why do so many people describe the same shadowy figures lurking in the trees? 3. The folklore of the silent places. Many cultures warn of cursed or sacred areas where time and sound behave strangely. The Native American legend of the Spirit Woods speaks of places where nature itself falls silent, marking the presence of unseen beings. In Japan, the Aokigahara Forest is known for its eerie silence, with many believing it's a place where spirits linger, waiting for the lost. 4. A rift between worlds? Some of the more chilling theories suggest that these silent zones may be thin places, locations where the veil between our world and another is weak. Could Daniel have accidentally wandered into one of these rifts and barely escaped? Daniel's story isn't unique. Hikers, campers, and survivalists have all reported these strange, silent zones, places where the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for something unseen to step forward. So, the next time you find yourself deep in the wilderness, pay attention. If the birds stop singing, if the wind no longer stirs the leaves, if you can't even hear your own footsteps, run, because you may not be alone. Have you ever experienced something unsettling in the wilderness? A place where sound itself seemed to disappear? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more terrifying tales from 13 o'clock. Jake wasn't the type to believe in campfire stories. A seasoned hiker, he'd walked dozens of trails across the country, pushing his limits with every new challenge. So when he heard about a mysterious trail deep in the Appalachian wilderness, he was intrigued, not scared. Locals called it the toll path. The story went like this. If you walked the trail, you had to leave an offering at the halfway marker, a flat stone in the middle of the path. Failure to do so, they warned, would mean you'd never find your way back. Jake chuckled at the idea. It's just another urban legend, he told himself. So, on a crisp October morning, he set out alone, determined to prove the superstition wrong. At first, the trail was like any other. Towering trees swayed in the breeze, their branches casting long shadows across the dirt path. The deeper he walked, the quieter it became. Birds fell silent. No rustling leaves. Even his own footsteps seemed muted, swallowed by the thick air. Then he saw it, the stone marker. It was exactly as described, a large, flat rock polished smooth by time. Scattered atop, it were various trinkets, coins, buttons, even an old photograph that had curled at the edges. Jake scoffed. This is ridiculous. Ignoring the uneasy feeling in his gut, he stepped past the stone without leaving a thing. For a moment, nothing happened. No sudden wind, no eerie whispers, just the sound of his own breath. Then, the path behind him disappeared. Jake spun around, heart hammering. The trail that had been so clear just moments ago was gone. No footprints, no packed dirt, just an endless stretch of untouched forest. His GPS? Useless. His compass? Spinning wildly, as if unsure of which way was north. A cold sweat formed on his brow. "Okay, stay calm," he muttered. "It's just a trick of the light." But the deeper he walked, the more unnatural things became. The trees moved, not swaying, but subtly shifting, their trunks twisting ever so slightly when he wasn't looking. The air thickened, making each breath feel labored. Shadows flickered just out of sight, but when he turned, nothing. And then he heard it. A footstep, not his own. Panic surged through him. He wasn't alone. "Hello." His voice sounded wrong, too quiet, as if the forest itself absorbed the sound. A soft crunch behind him. Slowly, he turned his head. A figure stood just beyond the trees. Not quite human, not quite anything. Its limbs were long, stretched too thin, its face obscured by shadow. But its eyes, hollow, empty voids, locked onto his. Then it smiled. A slow, unnatural grin stretching across where its face should have been. Jake bolted. His legs burned as he ran, crashing through the underbrush, heart pounding against his ribs. The forest seemed to twist and warp around him, the trees stretching impossibly high, the path vanishing beneath his feet. But the worst part? The thing never chased him. It didn't have to. No matter how far he ran, he always ended up back at the stone marker. Again, and again, and again. By the third loop, his breath was ragged. His knees shook. His mind screamed that this was impossible, but his body knew the truth. He was trapped, and the toll had not been paid. Desperation clawed at him. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he fumbled through his pockets. A coin, a button, anything. Nothing. Tears stung his eyes as he remembered the words of the locals. Something must be left behind. And so, with shaking fingers, he pulled out his pocket knife. A small price. A single lock of hair. The blade was cold as he sliced, the strands falling onto the stone. The moment they landed, the air shifted. The trees stopped moving. The weight pressing against his chest lifted, and the trail was back. Jake stumbled out of the forest at dawn, collapsing onto the dirt road where his car was parked. He had made it out, but he wasn't the same. He never spoke of what he saw, but he never hiked alone again. And before every journey, he always left something behind, just in case. Because some trails don't just demand a toll. They take one. So what exactly happened to Jake? Was it all just an illusion, an elaborate trick of the mind? Or is there something ancient lurking in the woods, waiting for those who refuse to pay their due? Perhaps it was luck that he escaped. Perhaps the forest simply let him go. But one thing is certain. The next time you find yourself on an unfamiliar trail and you see a pile of offerings left behind by other hikers, maybe, just maybe, you should leave something too, just in case. Some stories should never be forgotten. Alex wasn't new to hiking. They had spent years trekking deep into the wilderness, mapping out trails where few dared to go. But nothing could have prepared them for what happened that day. It started like any other solo hike. Crisp air, golden autumn, leaves crunching beneath their boots. The trail was remote, deep in the Pacific Northwest, far from any towns or cell service. Alex had hiked it once before, years ago, but something about it felt different this time. The trees loomed taller. The shadows stretched longer. The quiet felt heavier. 3 miles in, the uneasy feeling began. It wasn't fear, not yet, just that subtle awareness that something was off. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died completely. And then, a voice. "Help! Somebody please." Alex froze. The sound had come from somewhere up ahead, distant but clear. It was unmistakable. Someone was calling for help. They quickened their pace, heart pounding. "Hello," Alex called out. "Where are you?" No answer, just silence. But then, help me, louder this time, closer. Alex's breath hitched. There was something deeply wrong about the way the voice carried. It sounded flat, emotionless, like a recording played back through unseen speakers. Still, they pushed forward, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Then, they heard it again. Please, help. And that's when Alex's stomach turned to ice. Because the voice wasn't just calling for help. It was their voice. There's something deeply unsettling about hearing your own voice when you know you haven't spoken. It disrupts reality, makes you question the laws of nature. In psychology, this taps into what's known as the uncanny valley effect, the unsettling feeling when something mimics humanity but gets it just wrong enough to feel unnatural. In horror, auditory mimicry is one of the most effective tools for instilling dread. From folklore to modern horror films, the idea of a voice being stolen is an ancient fear, rooted in the idea that sound itself can be a predator. But what could mimic a human voice in the middle of the wilderness? Let's return to Alex's story. Alex's legs locked in place. Their own voice echoed from the trees, distorted, stretching the vowels like something trying to understand human speech, but failing. They turned in slow horror, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No animals. No footsteps. And then, crack! A branch snapped, not far behind them. Alex's breath came in shallow gasps. They had two choices: run back toward their car, 3 miles away, or keep going and risk finding whatever was mimicking them. And then, another sound. Where are you? Alex's blood ran cold. Because this time, the voice hadn't come from ahead. It had come from directly behind them. The concept of creatures that mimic human voices is terrifyingly common across cultures. In Navajo legend, skinwalkers are said to imitate voices to lure people away from safety. Similarly, Scandinavian folklore speaks of creatures called huldra that call out in familiar voices to trap wanderers in the woods. And then there's the whistling people of the Appalachian Mountains, an eerie legend warning travelers never to respond to whistling or voices calling their name in the forest, because it means something has noticed them. But whether these stories stem from superstition or real encounters, the pattern is chilling. Something is out there, and it's listening. Alex turned and ran. The trees blurred past, the cold air burning their lungs. Behind them, the voice called out again. Wait, don't leave me here. It was their voice. But it was wrong. They didn't stop running, didn't look back. The trail twisted and turned, but they pushed forward, desperate to reach their car. And then, silence. The voice stopped. The only sound was their own ragged breathing. For a moment, they dared to believe they were safe. But just as they reached their car, fumbling with the keys, they heard it again. Right next to them. A perfect, exact replica of their own voice, whispering, I found you. The forest stood still. The wind didn't blow. And Alex did the only thing they could do. They got in the car, locked the doors, and never looked back. Many people believe that encounters with mimicry creatures don't always end when you leave the woods. Some claim they hear their own voices late at night, outside their windows. Others report phone calls from their own number, only to hear static, or worse, themselves on the other end. Could these beings exist in ways we don't yet understand? Could they follow us home? Perhaps the scariest thought is this. What if you woke up one night and heard your own voice whispering from the other room? Would you go check? Or would you stay in bed and pray it doesn't find you? Stories of voice-mimicking entities have haunted people for centuries. Are they supernatural creatures? Some unknown aspect of nature? Or something worse? Something we're not meant to understand? Leave a comment below if you've ever experienced something strange in the wilderness. And remember, if you ever hear your own voice calling for help in the woods, don't answer.